And now the conclusion to our regularly scheduled series already in progress.
Oh no, there's no escape, my sweet little plum.
Hello greater YouTube area and the surrounding internet regions, this is Killer Cardinal DA7. On January 2nd of this year, I got into an argument over a post on Geeks Are Sexy's Facebook page. They posted a comic that I linked in the description where a young woman is cosplaying as part of a fandom and she's getting harassed by a rather rude guy who assumes she's a quote fake gamer girl. Most of the comic features another character who comes in and saves the young woman, a character called Gamer Mama, who proceeds to give the guy the business and teaches him an important lesson about respecting the young lady, leaving him in a crying heap in the final frame. I'd commented and said that I thought it was wrong for them to just repost the same static image they had posted month on month, year on year, as if nothing at all had changed, mainly because a static image is not capable of depicting any change in the situation. The world could do a complete 180 and that image will still be the same. After I made that comment, I was quickly leapt on by both women and men telling me, quote, nothing had changed. I countered by stating that sexist people may not be changing, but the people they harass are. Communities and attitudes have clearly become more welcoming of victims of said harassment. They're more supportive when such treatment occurs. They're becoming louder about how they feel. They're becoming less accepting when things like that happen, and they fight back more often. Essentially, gamer mamas are in most women's hearts, and I imagine many of them will come to each other's defense when harassment arises because they want to see it stopped. Problem is, the entirety of the responses I received were only concerned with the part of the comic where the girl was getting harassed, not the fact that gamer mama type characters are very likely popping up across the country, or the fact that the first person to speak up against me was a man. The fixation was on that first frame of the comic. I asked a few of the commenters on that thread if they defined quote change as harassment being completely eliminated. None of them answered that question. True, sexism and harassment haven't been exterminated, but how people react to them have most definitely changed. My point is, the small ways that situation have changed get no focus or attention due to A, the unshakable fear people have of it never changing, and B, the low frequency or impact of those changes. The terror that a reader endures over that first frame of the comic causes the more minuscule instances or changes to be ignored. However, in that situation, people should acknowledge the changes. When it comes to rape cases, some people's first reaction is to bring up that there have been women who have lied about being raped in the past. The idea for some is that those instances are too low a percentage to bother bringing them up at all, which then leads to the idea that all women who accuse men should be believed without question or investigation, and if that's disagreed with, it then leads to accusations of sexism and denial of a very real problem. And I agree with that in part. When a news story just comes out, some people just shout that women have lied about being raped, and to me, that shows a significant amount of insensitivity beyond just being critical or curious about details, because that reaction and dismissal are rarely backed off to admit the rape actually happened when enough evidence is presented. It's not initial doubt than admission of a problem, it's just flat out denial. The dismissal just stays intact the entire time. Fact is, the amount of women who have lied about being raped is unquestionably low compared to the high amount of women who have actually been raped. It's one thing if a person brings up that some rape accusations are dishonest or exaggerated, while in the same breath acknowledging that tons of women have actually been raped over the years, and we need to examine what can be done to change that aspect of our culture and help victims, like I'm doing right now. It's another to only focus on the falsified cases. I mean, I hear people do that, and the obvious question for me becomes, why are those the only cases that matter to that particular person? A story is being broadcast because someone else is suffering. What kind of culture do we live in where showing sympathy for another person is a bad thing? When all the emphasis is on the potential for dishonesty, is the idea that if you're being sympathetic, you're more gullible? That you're being manipulated by feelings, and by showing feelings, you're showing your weakness? Is it just some self-centered idea that we have to protect ourselves above all others, and if you show sympathy for another person, you're not paying enough attention to keeping yourself safe from being fooled by vicious pathological liars who constantly fabricate stories of being attacked? Much of that constitutes toxic masculinity, which I went over in round 1. There are plenty of conspiracies in the world. Not everything is one. A woman's life and or mental state gets ripped to shreds by being attacked or abused to that degree. Why does the theoretical aspect of, well, now I guess women get to lie about this easier, get so much focus, and not, hey, this woman may not recover from this. Maybe we should show her some support and help her get her life back together. Because of the insanely low chance that she lied, the lack of support actual victims feel is far harsher damage than putting ourselves out there, caring for someone and finding out it was a lie. Quick, simple truth from your old pal Killer Cardinal DA7. I understand that trusting others is a dangerous game, but when it comes to caring for other people, showing sympathy, taking them seriously, if the only thing at risk is being wrong and no other problem can result from trusting a person, then you're always doing the right thing by offering your trust. It's the other person who screws up and is wrong by lying. Keep that in mind. Anyways, I will say I do feel that women should be just as outraged as some men are, if not more so, when women are found out to be lying about being raped or assaulted. If nothing else, it takes the legitimate suffering that others have gone through and attempts to misuse it just to get attention that isn't deserved. When men bring up false accusation instances, though, it's not in a context of being attentive and respectful to actual victims. It's either to discredit a woman coming forward with an accusation, or because some men fear getting accused themselves at some point, or both. And what doesn't help is the sentiment felt by many that I alluded to a moment ago, that even bringing up due process of law to some people feels just as abusive toward women as actual abuse. Problem is, there are unquestionably times when due process or an investigation are needed to determine truth in a situation. I linked in the description a bunch of real-life stories, but I'm going to start with one from November of 2014, where a male student at the University of Massachusetts met a female student. The two of them were smoking marijuana. She straddled him. They were kissing and making out. She told him she wasn't interested in intercourse. He said that was fine. She eventually put her hand down his pants, then began giving him a blowjob, a little while into which she received a call from a friend. She told the male student that she felt bad getting him worked up and leaving. He playfully grabbed her arm, they kissed, they traded numbers, and she left. Later on, after speaking with her friend in person, she came to the conclusion that she had been sexually assaulted. Now look, if there had been more to that story, had he been the initiator and or aggressor, had she vocally said no to everything he said he wanted, had she been physically attacked or violated by force because he wasn't taking no for an answer, then I would likely be in support of him enduring restrictions around campus and from activities he was supposed to partake in, as well as other punishments. But the restrictions he sustained eventually led to him suffering a significant decline in health, leaving the University of Massachusetts and never coming back, essentially killing the dreams that he was there to pursue. I said in round 2, around the 39-minute mark, that I don't want to see ordinary everyday regret turn into I never wanted that, he took advantage of me, and I feel this particular case might fall into that category. What I saw happening there was the female in question looked at the situation, realized she didn't offer or request consent during the encounter, and made the assessment that she was assaulted. But again, if she was the aggressor the entire time and even asked him if it was okay if they didn't have sex and he said it was fine, exactly how did he assault her? I mean, it's a weird differentiation, but in essence, she feels she was the victim of assault, but he didn't sound guilty of assaulting her. An investigation should have uncovered that truth, but even if it did, he still suffered as a result, and it wasn't a malicious lie either, it was a miscalculation or misjudgment. That being said, I do fully acknowledge that often the legal system ends up not favoring a woman who actually has been attacked, raped, or abused. Another story occurred in April 2013, where former Detroit Tigers pitcher Alfredo Simon was accused of anally raping a woman who had initially consented to being intimate with him. She had even texted a friend beforehand that she was going to, quote, fuck the baseball player, but once things got rougher than she wanted, she tried to run, and he kept pulling her back to the bed by her hair, continued to rape her, and eventually ejaculated on her face. She was examined by a forensic nurse later that day, and the woman had declined to have photos taken of the damage done to her anus, which would have helped the case against Simone, as the U.S. Attorney's Office determined the evidence that had been gathered wasn't enough to file charges. Okay, yes, some women do really like rough sex. Some like being manhandled, thrown around, maybe even slapped or hit or choked or ordered to do uncomfortable things. However, lots of women don't like being treated that way. Everyone has their own personal preferences about what they like and don't like. As I also pointed out in round 2, being fully communicative with someone you're with either ensures or at least aids consent before diving headlong into activities that aren't preferred. Sexual encounters can take dark turns down roads that really aren't safe or kind. Then again, I don't know Alfredo Simon. If he was intoxicated enough to not have control over his judgments and actions, communication may not have been possible in the moment. And that's a choice he made getting drunk at all. According to the article, the guy was 6'6", 265 pounds, not a tiny man. The bigger a person is, male or female, the more dangerous they can become if they lose control, whether as a result of substances or simply anger. Bottom line though, we can argue that she consented at first, but she eventually said no, she wasn't allowed to leave, and the legal system didn't bring about the punishment it should have. There are many people out there now who feel that accusations should just be believed 100% without question, and I'm sorry, while I do agree that we should take accusations more seriously, due process should never be excused outright in favor of believing someone saying they're a victim without any questions or investigation. If anything, due process should be stricter, more thorough, more efficient. As a result, it would be fairer for everyone. Prosecuting every man that a woman points at may be unfair unfair and unjust, but we can definitely take women more seriously and believe them enough to conduct proper investigations when necessary and change our attitude that he couldn't possibly have abused that girl. That may drag out punishments, but it should mean more men who commit rape are punished in the end, and to anyone doubting those women, more undeniable proof will be there to hopefully remove that doubt. Clearly, there's a ton of conflation going on, men assuming that just because some women like rough treatment that all do, and those women are being overly sensitive and complaining after the fact. Then again, the pushback from some women who think due process should just be thrown out in some of these cases is also a wild overshoot. It opens the door for innocent people to be punished for things they didn't do or actions they didn't take. Of course, if we're speaking about the extremes of sexual assault, sexual harassment, investigations, etc., we should mention Brock Turner like I did last time, because there are people who defend Brock. You know, he was young, he was a kid, it was one time at a party, people saw his behavior as just a bad judgment call of youth. Brock's own father is quoted as saying his exceptionally short sentence was a steep price to pay for 20 minutes of action. Yeah, action to him, violation to his victim. Living women aren't toys, they're actually human beings. He may not deserve to be burned at the stake, but he definitely deserved worse than what he got. However, there are other cases to talk about that go way farther than Brock did. Bill Cosby's scandal about years and years of drugging women and having sex with them while they were unconscious. The unfolding web of lies, deceit, and corruption regarding executive Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein's numerous instances of lewd behavior, manipulating, harassing, and abusing female actors. You'd think those two stories would be no-brainers. Stories that any reasonable, sane person would be able to hear about, step back from their political posturing, and agree how disgusting and deplorable they are. But since they broke, people both of high public stature and average everyday citizens have come forward to defend both of them. When I think about these two men, I have a hard time deciding who's worse. On one side, you have a guy whose good-natured sense of humor and hit TV show made him not only a household name, but quite literally an icon for good values, and then he's revealed to have drugged women to have sex with them against their will, action that couldn't be farther from what people knew him to be. On the other side, you had the executive producer of classic films like Reservoir Dogs, The English Patient, Good Will Hunting, among many other big hits from the 80s and 90s, who actively and consciously used his status and influence in Hollywood to coerce women either with big dreams of being noticed or the ambition to make it to the top of the ladder they were already climbing into performing sexual favors for him. Sometimes technically of their own will, as in some probably reluctantly consented, though their dreams being dangled in front of them obviously hold a certain level of persuasive pull that a simple, hey, you feel like getting naughty doesn't quite hold. Attorney Norm Pattis and honestly lots of other people who love trying to shoot holes in Hollywood any chance they can find apparently tried to conflate the fact that since actresses depict sexual acts on screen, you know, the art form of theater that has gone back centuries, those actresses should be fine submitting to sexual requests in order to even be allowed to perform such art at all. Even if a few of those women, as I said, reluctantly consented, as in Harvey offered them boosts to their careers and all they had to do is sleep with him, he's also accused of bursting into women's rooms and raping them by forcing oral on them, like Annabelle Sciorra from The Sopranos and former production worker Mimi Haley. You can't spin that as Hollywood being hypocritical as they, quote, sell sex while Harvey gets it physically. Rape, even the type that doesn't involve intercourse, is obviously rough and criminal. When comparing Cosby and Weinstein, though, I suppose there isn't much morality typically associated with executive producers in Hollywood, so for Harvey to be revealed as that crude a person is a lot more expected than the good old Jello pudding man. Link is in the description of 35 accounts of women Cosby took advantage of as well. Many of those stories are pretty similar. They passed out after a drink or taking pills he gave them. You can try to argue, why did you take those pills? And there may be some truth to that. Anyone who gets involved with anyone in an intimate setting needs to be careful to not agree to anything they're not sure of. But when a guy like Cosby has such a trustworthy image and personality, it's not expected of him. Eventually, the responsibility of giving them drugs to make them unable to fight back has to fall on him. Whether it's power, influence, or just a trustworthy reputation, people in those positions always need to take most of that responsibility. You can say those women should have been smarter or more critical, but you also need to say it was sick and malicious for Cosby to have drugged them in the first place. Ask yourself what you'd rather have. Men, I'm talking to you. What would you rather have? Would you rather be hanging out with someone you look up to, someone who offered to mentor you in your career? Suddenly you wake up out of nowhere after losing hours with that same guy hovering over you naked with cum between your legs? Or would you rather meet someone who could quite literally make every dream and desire and ambition of yours a reality, and all you have to do is consciously serve this person's every whim, no matter how much of a humiliated slave you feel like in the process? Not a pretty set of options, I'll grant you. If it were me, I guess I'd say B. At least there, if I went through it all, I'd have the dream I strove for, albeit a dream built on a pretty dark lie. Or else if I didn't want to go through with it, I'd at least have a chance to fight back or escape or something. If I'm drugged and or passed out, it might not even register that anything happened until years and years later when no recourse or justice is available. I'm sure there are some moments when public figures probably need or want to meet with people privately and sit and talk away from large crowds. That isn't innately inappropriate. I imagine being seen and heard constantly can be pretty straining. But when cases like this happen and keep happening and keep happening, it places doubt in the minds of every woman who gets invited to do that for fear that violation, violence, harassment, or assault could occur. You can argue, well, those women keep agreeing to it, it's on them. Not when that trust keeps getting broken with lewd, inappropriate, pushy, or criminal behavior, or at least behavior they didn't consent to. One of the biggest questions that surrounded the Weinstein and Cosby stories was, why did no one come forward sooner? As outraged as some people have been when hearing or reading personal accounts, like the one I linked in the description from TMZ, how Weinstein went to Angie Everhart's room on a friend's boat, he blocked the door, pulled his pants down, and masturbated onto the floor, what made people just as outraged was that accounts come out all the time about high-profile people in Hollywood who knew he was doing these things but didn't say anything. Some are perceived to have waved it aside as, quote, just Harvey. Oprah Winfrey, for example, is constantly brought up as being a massive hypocrite for associating with him in the past while all this was going on. Harvey was overly friendly, overly affectionate, he was rumored to have done some of these things and rumored to have taken advantage of many women, and instead of anyone coming forward, police investigations taking place, and eventually punishment being served, people just sat back and allowed him to continue untouched, free to do as he pleased to whomever he pleased. The best theory I can come up with is that anyone who was actually taken advantage of by Harvey felt like they were mostly unable to say anything due to how the situations could have been manipulated. They couldn't have thought they'd stand a chance in a legit court case. Colleagues of Harvey's would testify to his good nature, helping cases and accusations against him get thrown out. Like I said before, there were probably situations where Harvey asked a female for sexual favors in exchange for giving them career favors, and the female consented and obliged, and if that's true, it would then likely cause the non-consensual instances to be placed under harsher scrutiny. Even though there were lots of others who were victims, if one single person doesn't know about the other victims, and that one person comes out and says something and no one else does, they could be viewed as just trying to get attention, or they'd be paid off or kept silent, and it all gets swept under the rug. Not to mention the pressure on that one person. Like, let's say they come forward for their own self-respect and self-worth. Let's say they won years ago. Let's say they succeeded in getting justice for what they went through, and Harvey is not on hand to produce anything else. Innocent extras and actors, whether low on the totem pole or the highest caliber, along with, I don't know, key grips and caterers and the hundreds of other people who work on shows and movies in Hollywood, those productions have the potential to get shut down. Those people could be out of the biggest opportunities in their lives. And why? Because I couldn't keep my mouth shut, because I didn't follow the culture and the rules, because I didn't compromise myself in a way that I personally find questionable. I mean, it's a rite of passage. Everybody does it. What's so special about me that I can't just say yes? All possible thoughts racing through one of his victims' heads. And don't get me wrong, I'm not implying those reasonings for not coming forward are in any way okay, or that those behaviors should have been allowed to happen. Those thoughts and fears are just likely what would have come up. A victim of his might look at all that stacked against them and realize the rock and hard place they're forced between. Either keep it to themselves, only encouraging Harvey to keep ruining lives, or risk the universe being brought down on their heads. People in the industry felt a lot of important productions were riding on Harvey's input. Angie herself in the TMZ video I linked clearly frightened by the prospect of Harvey, quote, getting stories crushed. The last thing his victims wanted was to look like they were responsible for bringing down the bulk of Hollywood and the entertainment industry by exposing that web of corruption and assault by bringing forward rape charges. The longer it went, the more pressure would be on each victim to not come forward, and Harvey very likely knew that, which only made what he did worse. In Cosby's case, like I said, he was an icon of good family values. People trusted him. I mean, how does anyone come forward and accuse that guy of drug-related rape? I'm not saying people shouldn't have believed it or even that it wasn't true. I'm saying it's not likely many other people would have believed it years ago. Things would get turned around so those women, even while drugged on pills, looked like they were making up stories just for attention, or else if they were believed, then a national icon of a comedian gets destroyed. And he deserved to get destroyed for what he did. Again, I'm not saying these women shouldn't have come forward or that they shouldn't expose a person who would drug them and rape them. Anyone who commits acts like that, especially in such ridiculous frequency as that over so many years, they 100% deserve punishment. I'm just trying to understand the mindset of a victim, how they might rationalize not coming forward, and it seems like that's where it is. Denial or rationalizing seems easier than enduring the national criticism that comes, not even might come. It comes from making accusations of well-known people, especially when those accusations have such a high likelihood of backfire, and the victim is screamed at as being a slutty whore looking to screw the celebrity when all they want is justice for being mistreated. It'd be one thing if those accusations were taken seriously and investigated and court cases followed reliably, but most of Harvey's victims probably saw the chance that someone like Harvey would fight back and turn things around to make them look like they were at fault to be too high to bother without appropriate firepower. One of the only ways it would have been believable either in Harvey or Cosby's case is how they came out at all. If all or most of the victims came forward at the same time. Unfortunately, it wasn't until decades after the fact that any stepped forward with their stories, and by now, many of them have passed their statute of limitations. From what I've heard, some may still be punishable, but most aren't. With as much pressure as there must have been to not fight against a celebrity, logically it would seem like less of a conflicting feeling for a victim of sexual assault to expose a male who isn't a huge public figure, as they have less leverage to use against the woman or less to lose on the whole. But according to many accounts, those men still get let go. Last June in North Carolina, 19-year-old Aaliyah Palmer consented to having sex with a man at a party and changed her mind midway through as the encounter became far too rough for her. He's accused of ripping her hair out of her head. It went on for 2 hours. Other people filmed it through the bathroom door and put it on Snapchat, but even with video evidence, due to a law in North Carolina that says a woman can't withdraw consent once it's given, she was unable to press charges. And according to her account, part of what swayed the court was that the perpetrator was in the military. Whether a guy is a huge star working in Hollywood or an average Joe, if they're accused of committing rape, the assumption is that a man is innocent until proven guilty. Now, I agree that that's a fair way to approach most criminal cases. However, when there are so many ways sexual situations can get manipulated to either conveniently add or remove consent, add or remove comment or remark, add or remove a grope or a touch, the perspective can completely change from one person being the aggressor to the other. The dynamics and nuances of connecting either in person or online, especially when it comes to sex and the seeking of it, can be extremely touchy. Thankfully, there are instances where rape is more directly seen and punished, like the case in Steubenville, Ohio in the summer of 2012, when 2 football players raped a drunk girl with their fingers. It was filmed and recorded by numerous other people, spread around on social media and texted about incessantly, and they were charged with at least 2 years in juvenile jail. Just because there are proven cases where one or more women along the way have exaggerated details or accusations, and one or more men have been accused of something that didn't happen, and those women were wrong to lie, that doesn't mean every woman is blowing out of proportion when a guy forces himself on her, violates her, distributes pictures of her against her will, or gets her to agree to sexual activity she's not comfortable with by dangling her dream in front of her face, or even just a promotion or a raise in an ordinary office job, or knocking her out with chemicals to fuck her when she doesn't want to do that. Those victims aren't exaggerating their suffering. They're not over dramatizing anything. They were abused. Men, I asked earlier what you'd rather have, getting fucked while drugged or being treated like a slave. If you haven't answered yet, go ahead and do so in the comments now. I already went. I said the latter. It's your turn. Since Weinstein and Cosby, though, allegations have been coming out about tons of other prominent males, not just Hollywood actors, but in other industries as well, like comedians. Louis C.K. being revealed to have asked 5 different women if they wanted to watch him masturbate, and Aziz Ansari having a really awkward date with a young woman which walked the line between mildly inappropriate when just being a little too forward at times, and really crude when he's sticking fingers in her mouth and blocking her way out. That seems to be a really common move. Guys, do yourself a favor. You could probably avoid a ton of negative attention and possibly criminal charges if you at least let a woman get away. If she wants to run, let her run. She's already put off by the encounter by that point. If you pull back, there won't be anything else to accuse you of outside of what already occurred. Anyways, politics is obviously not immune either. Former comedian turned Senator Al Franken was dragged through the mud over an incident at a USO show in 2006 with Leanne Tweeden. That's the story I originally heard about, where he pushed one or more kisses on her and had a photo taken of him of either grabbing her breasts while she was sleeping or motion that he was grabbing her. However, in looking him up, ABC News Online had a bunch of other similar accusations against him. I linked that in the description. The woodwork is bleeding with accusations, and in most of these cases, I'll admit, my first reaction is to want to know the exact details. Not because I have some sick fetish for rape or harassment, just because I want to assess each thing to determine if a person is being reasonable to make an accusation. Along with the idea that women can retroactively withdraw consent after the fact from my last video on this, there's also an idea that all accusers should be believed, as I mentioned earlier. And while I'm not trying to paint men as the real victims, when the amount of women who are actually victimized by sexual assault is clearly so much larger than the amount of men falsely accused of sexual assault, the act of simply believing all women 100% seems like the easiest way to simply shift power from one end of the spectrum to the other. Men are usually innocent until proven guilty in a rape case, so now they would be assumed guilty until proven innocent. Either way you look at that, it's pretty unfair to assume every woman is a temptress whore looking to dick over a man, just as it's unfair to assume every man is a vicious predator looking to abuse women for dominance or physical pleasure. Either someone who is victimized has the potential to get vengeance on someone who may be innocent, or a person who committed a horrible act against another person might walk away completely unscathed. Neither way is just, so what do? In sexual assault cases, there are almost always factors that are easy to twist or move around or change in order to shift blame. There has to be better ways to determine the real truth of every single thing that happens, better ways to determine responsibility. Obviously, every case isn't the same, and like I said in round 2, full-on rape cases should be fairly clear. A woman reports it, police can collect evidence with a rape kit, they can look at the black eye or bruises or scratches if she was attacked, other available DNA evidence, and connecting those things to a perpetrator shouldn't be too hard unless the perpetrator was someone the victim didn't know or it was dark and hard to see. When consent comes up as the question, like if no violent or invasive pieces of evidence present themselves, I'm at a loss what to do across the board outside of simply examining the respective stories of witnesses and parties involved. My last video dealt heavily with the Second Amendment and the gun discussion. However, here I want to bring up the Fifth Amendment, which says the following, quote, "No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be witness against himself." Now, compulsion can manifest in lots of ways, such as manipulation, blackmail, negotiation, bargaining, coercion, and many other immoral or unethical ways to get a person to say the words, "I did it." And I get why that's widely considered wrongdoing. Authority figures hang their hats on confession as the most damning evidence against a suspect, and if a person confesses, the case becomes closed instantly. And I get that polygraph tests, aka lie detectors, are also seen as at best 70% accurate. Links are in the description to some resources about lie detectors, but there has to be some combination that can be utilized: polygraph, microexpressions, other psychological tells to determine truth, guilt, remorse, and other responsibility in a situation. The American Psychological Association website, apa.org, says this about polygraphs, quote, "An honest person may be nervous when answering answering truthfully, and a dishonest person may be non-anxious. I believe this to be true, but there has to be ways to appropriately calm someone who's innocent to make their answers show more accurate results, and at the same time differentiate those results from the answers of someone who's guilty. I mean, how is there no way of going through a step-by-step process that happens to involve a polygraph? A polygraph alone is not enough evidence to convict a person. Okay, I can agree, and I think even people who put a lot of faith in them, like I do, can admit that we can't just slap a polygraph down on a witness stand and if the thingy wiggles too much, then guilty. That doesn't work. But look what happens when someone on the road is pulled over on suspicion that they may be driving while intoxicated. Most of us, regardless of our criminal records, can recite a list of different tests or exercises an officer has a suspect perform to determine on the spot whether or how intoxicated a driver is, right? Hell, as little alcohol as I've had in my life, I was pulled over years ago when leaving a bar late at night with a buddy of mine. The cop went through a process. He asked me questions. He had me walk a straight line. He searched my car. He could have administered a breathalyzer even though he didn't. He could have had me recite the alphabet backwards even though he didn't. Once he realized I was sober and not a danger to myself or my friend, he was nice enough to let us go. So okay, you can't just look at a person getting asked questions and being anxious and see that as enough evidence for a conviction. But here's the thing. We approve of our justice system going through days, weeks, months, if not years, simply talking about a situation in court and letting 12 random people get pulled out of their jobs and routines to determine truth and define morality for us. That's okay, but why isn't it mandatory to hook people up to polygraphs during their testimony? Because of the Fifth Amendment? Let me remind you, and I say remind you because most of you have been summoned to jury duty, and those of you who have escaped being forced into service know this well enough already. Those 12 people who are chosen to serve, they get filtered out and approved by attorneys who mostly have winning the case in mind, not the objectivity of those jurors. Honestly, random people as jurors only really works if those random people have a vested interest in fairness and justice, like if they spend quality recreation time when they're not at work dispensing real justice onto criminals, and I guarantee none of them do that. And if they do that, they probably wouldn't be random people. They'd be justice dealers. There might even be a card or license for them to do that. Many of them are chosen because attorneys know that regardless of whether or not someone says they are not going to be biased, those jurors are chosen based on evidence those attorneys know exists or they know doesn't exist. Plus, even if those 12 people are deemed to be objective and fair, most of them are probably on social media, and you know what that means, don't you? That means if they see someone they relate to being accused of something too harshly, or they're convinced that person is severely guilty, they'll hand down a verdict they believe to be true. Justice is determined by which side wins, not what ends up being the most real or fair. A polygraph isn't compelling someone to be witness against himself, though. Even if you say, but hooking a suspect up to a machine that determines stress levels makes the suspect feel compelled to confess. Yeah, I still don't buy that. An FBI agent or police officer lying to a suspect to get a confession, however, that's pretty clearly compulsion. Hook them up to polygraphs too, I'm fine with that. Polygraph is certainly farther from the definition of compulsion than using artificially manufactured fear during interrogation by way of threats or mistruths to pull out a confession that may not be accurate due to those methods. A polygraph may not be 100% accurate to determine the entirety of truth all on its own, but it's just as crazy to think that just because someone confesses, they actually did it. Plenty of people confess simply because they don't have adequate evidence that they didn't do something, and or because it would get them a reduced sentence. A polygraph, though, is infinitely more objective than 12 random jurors controlled by attorneys out to accomplish a goal. And I know, some women hearing this may think I'm going on about polygraph tests as my way of disbelieving female accusers. It's really not. I believe most female accusers are telling the truth, which is why I'm okay endorsing polygraphs. They're honest about their abuse. The guy in question shows deception or anxiety when answering questions about what he did. Chances are good he gets punished. However, if we want to ensure women don't get handled the ball and say, point to who you want to go to jail and they're gone, it keeps them honest as well. By the same token, a significant majority of men who rape women know they did something wrong. The amount of true sociopaths who can, quote, beat a lie detector by answering questions and not showing any remorse or stress has got to be extremely low. An average dude is not sociopathic enough to beat a lie detector. No friggin' way. And even among that low a number of perpetrators, just by watching them, looking at their movements, mannerisms, twitches, demeanors, their tone when speaking, facial expressions when answering those questions, I guarantee between all that and a court trial, the truth could be extracted without any unethical negotiations or threats or squeezing someone for a confession. Those men who actually commit crimes can go to jail like they deserve, and the ones who walk free or get punished much less severely are the ones who made a rude remark or comment and are getting accused of something much harsher. I do agree with the sentiment that a majority of female accusers are telling the truth about their accounts of abuse and assault, but there are unquestionably going to be times when consent and regret are being confused by both women and men. Times when things didn't get rough or violent and the details are extremely muddy and some truth or guilt needs to be determined. There are unquestionably times when a man misinterprets what a woman wants. He thinks he's reading signals or messages. He chooses to go and engage when he's not welcome to do so. Maybe he gets only a mild invitation and goes way too far when he doesn't know for sure if she wants anything. He keeps going and doesn't pull himself back, and there needs to be more consistent punishment or consequence to inspire more restraint in men overall. At the very least, how about in men who are aggressors 100% of the time and didn't relent when told specifically no? I know there's a ton of anger out there at men, and after 3 whole videos on this, I get exactly why. Tons of men have acted inappropriately towards women for quite a long while in history. I just hope that anger goes from being on the defensive to evening things out so women get enough control they don't have to worry anymore about being violated or taken advantage of in every encounter. And it doesn't go further onto the offensive to take men down at every turn when it's not fair simply because history. I'm sure it's probably easy for many people to look at the flood of accusations and say, oh, come on, not every single one of these can be true, can they? But most of those men aren't even bothering to fight, and that's not to say they're weak or just rolling over. I'm saying if they don't bother to fight the accusations, or if they provide some statement or apology or explanation, as flimsy as they may seem sometimes, then they're probably guilty. It's one thing to be in court or interrogated by police, being threatened with legal action, and confessing because pleading guilty reduces a sentence. It's another to not be under any immediate threat of legal action and apologizing or taking responsibility when there isn't any requirement to do so. I'd like to think if a woman made an accusation about a male public figure and that male public figure held a press conference and said flat out, she's completely lying, I was never there, I have proof I was never there, I never did those things, ask me anything about that day, I remember the entire thing from morning to night, she fabricated the entire thing. It would lend a little more to him being innocent. But so far, we really haven't seen much of that. At most, a statement here, an explanation there, but not many flat out 100% denials. And if they really are guilty, then all of us should question what we do to see if there's any room for improvement. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't, but we should at least put ourselves under the microscope and above all, be respectful and careful wherever we can. I hope that in light of all this, not every case is viewed the same exact way. There's absolutely a difference between someone who abused power for decades, manipulated, and took advantage of countless women, and once all that truth comes forward, they spend every minute dodging questions about it without a shred of remorse or guilt, and someone else who had one or two misjudgments many years ago, they make direct amends with those people they abused or took advantage of, those victims even clear them of guilt, and they proceed to dedicate significant parts of their lives to helping others because they legitimately regret their actions. To ignore that difference would be really unfair, but then again, we've seen a ton of the former, barely any, if any, of the latter. It'd be interesting to see the latter take place. I'd love to see how people would even react to it. Until then, I guess we just have to analyze what instances of the former we have and work to fix problems where it's in our power to do so. This is Killer Cardinal DA7 reminding you to use your head, be nice to each other, and take the time to think. Talk to you later.
Thanks, Control. You just saved my life. And you were very good. You saved all my friends, trapped most of the Augs. I'll bet with a little practice you could be perfect.